Hello, AxIT Allies, and welcome again to another monthly free training session. I'm Andrew. I'm here with Mr. Number One AxIT himself, Luke Nelson, and it's going to be another fantastic session because I know, Luke, this is all about something that you're pretty passionate about, which is all things jump assessment.
Yes, exactly. We're going to get the jumps and plyos, and really relevant for anyone doing any sport that involves any running, jumping, field sports. So a lot of this stuff is highly relevant to all our clients. So yeah, really important stuff, and yeah, look forward to getting stuck into it.
I think that's the key point, really. For us, one of the big things that we developed the AxIT system to do was obviously to assess our strength assessments, make that really, really easy. But this is where we're starting to then go to that next level, really start to look at that explosive power, really start to look at, I guess, those kind of jumping-based forces, which a lot of athletic individuals need for sure. And it's something that, really, until we had the AxIT system, this stuff was almost pretty difficult to be able to assess. So I'm really, really looking forward to being able to get stuck into this and, pardon the pun, but jump into our AxIT assessment as we might say. So let's get stuck into things here, mate. Look, you mentioned before that obviously, jumping is really important for lots of sports. And I think it's probably summed up, really well just by this kind of table here, looking at some of those kind of major league sports all around the world, including AFL here in Australia. And, one of the things that we see is that jump assessment is obviously so important when, all these sports, particularly when they're performing things like testing combines and, really starting to assess, I guess, the performance of different athletes, particularly on the way up to them being drafted or, selected for certain teams. It's obviously such an important assessment that a lot of these different sports look at to really define, I guess, whether this individual is going to be a high performer.
That's right. And these testing results here, from the counter movement jump, and that's a test we're going to be talking about soon. But it forms a part of really all the athletic testing combines because it reflects in terms of a number of qualities in the ability to generate power. Also, can give a reflection of speed, and we'll sort of talk about a little bit more how some of those counter movement jump qualities reflect in across other athletic areas. But yeah, it is a great test, and something that we want to be looking at to give a really good insight into the individual's athletic abilities. And there's some pretty impressive numbers. You won't see too many people in clinic posting numbers like that, a whopping 117 centimeters. That is unbelievable. But
yeah, it's exactly right. And look, and it's probably displayed, to get a bit of a grasp on what that actually looks like. This is an example of, I think it is the current record holder in that combine. I don't think it's the individual on that table, actually, because I think it was a recent result that was achieved. But, when we look at the performance of some of these individuals and the type of counter movement, vertical jumps that they're performing, we can see, it's almost like they're kind of taking off into outer space. So some amazing results here. But this is where, I think being able to assess the people that we work with and being able to kind of see where they compare to some of these numbers and some of the references that we're going to discuss, this is going to give, I guess, a bit of context on where people are at, particularly if you're working, with those kind of elite individuals, maybe individuals who are looking to be selected for some of these major league, kind of sports or at a professional level. But even if you're working with, amateur athletes and weekend warriors and people who want to get out there and just perform at their best, being able to have these assessments are going to be, things that are really going to translate into performance overall.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the more clinical conditions that I'll be using these jumps and hops for as well too. We'll chat a bit more about that. But it's funny, actually, this footage reminds me of when you get patients doing counter movement and hop tests. One of the first things I'll do is look at the roof, and my comment is, don't worry, mate, you're not going to hit. Yeah. But if I had this guy, I probably wouldn't be doing it in my room. I'd be going out for the gym space there where there's a bit more room. So
Yeah, you certainly want to make sure that you've got that space available.
Yeah,
But look,
that's
I think
exactly.
as we kind of said, look, the reason why I guess that kind of counter movement jump or that vertical jump assessment is probably chosen once again as a performance test is it's one of those tests that's just really, really versatile and has a lot of, I guess, correlation and application across lots of different performance tests. We talked, I believe it was in our last training session, in respect to looking at things like the pull movements and the isometric mid-thigh pull, how that assessment had a lot of carryover to a lot of different assessments that we see, particularly in the literature. And the vertical jump is one that has a lot as well. So if we kind of go down this list here, we see that even from, research performed back in the 60s, they started to see that vertical jump assessment had a lot of relationship, just to general kind of motor coordination and physical fitness. Obviously, we can understand that people who can jump, quite high are obviously going to be coordinated. They're obviously going to be fit individuals. But then we also see that it has a lot of correlation with, I guess, some of those kind of running and change of direction type tests as well. So, for example, our RAST test here, that's a test that's a bit like a beat test, but it has a little bit of a recovery kind of phase at the end of each kind of, I guess, kind of run back and forth. So it's just a slightly different variation, but we see that individuals who perform really well on the vertical jump there, they're going to perform well on tests like that, as well as tests like our kind of change of direction test, our agility T test or a pro agility test, particularly in kind of soccer and field-based athletes. If you can jump really high, you're probably also going to be performing pretty well on a test like that. And those are two tests that are, assessments that are really nice if you've got, plenty of space, maybe a big field that you can perform those assessments in and things like that. But if you are kind of based more in a clinical setting and you still want to assess an athletic individual as to kind of their performance in that respect, this is where you might use that vertical jump as a bit of a go-to to be able to, I guess, kind of assess those higher levels of performance.
And like you mentioned, I think, as I touched on before as well, the reason that they choose this test in the combine is because it does reflect a lot of these other athletic abilities. And I think in terms of, for us as clinicians or anyone working in a clinic with limited space, we can't be doing, T tests and 40-meter sprint time. So being able to perform a simple test like a counter movement jump does give you some sort of indication of their explosive ability. And I think that combining what we spoke about last time with the mid-thigh pull, which again has got a lot of correlations to a lot of other athletic pursuits, including sprint time as well. I think the isometric mid-thigh pull and the counter movement jump, which we'll talk a bit more about, but that both together can give you can be really good predictor of some of these other things. And I'll certainly do, and I've found myself using more and more of these two tests in the counter movement jump and the isometric mid-thigh pull over the last 12 months. And it's great too, in that it also, for people with they're coming in with a condition, an ailment or an illness, but it can be great just in terms of where are you at? Let's do some performance testing, and so we're not just dealing with people that are in pain, but people that are looking to improve their performance. And this is another one of those tests alongside the mid-thigh pull, which are perfect to use for that occasion.
Yeah, I think that's kind of spot on. And look, and I'd love to hear from the allies as well. If you are kind of starting to put together maybe testing batteries to screen maybe some athletic individuals or, kind of assess individuals, like what are you using as part of your kind of combine of tests, I guess, in that respect? I know I completely agree with you there, Luke, that, things like that mid-thigh pull and the, counter movement jump, they're always, real priorities in terms of any of my screening that I do with any athletes. And it just becomes one of those, if you're using that kind of testing, I guess, procedure, it allows you to kind of work with those individuals, throughout the year in terms of being able to just constantly monitor, maybe how they're going with their training, how they're going with their performance, whether or not there are any kind of, I guess, red flags in the sense that maybe some of these results are kind of dropping off for whatever reason. You can kind of be a bit more, I guess, preemptive with the people that you work with and work with those individuals maybe before problems arise. So, starting to collect this performance data really becomes useful, particularly down the line if you've, kind of collected it preemptively, I guess.
Yeah, and that's, as you said, from that monitoring perspective, and a lot of clubs, sporting clubs, do use the counter movement jump as a monitoring tool. That we spoke about the mid-thigh pull being used for that purpose as well too. So those two tests can help sort of determine recovery, how someone's handling their the training loads.
Yep. Yeah, no, so it's a fantastic test. Once again, it has lots of correlation to lots of different tests, as we can see here. So it should be one of the high priorities for anyone's kind of screening battery there. But I guess, I mean, we should probably then just reiterate, what are we actually assessing when we're, kind of performing that kind of jump assessment? And this kind of comes back to some of the other presentations that we've done. We see that, there's a real bias, I guess, to some certain muscle groups when we are trying to jump as high as we possibly can.
Yep, and look who's on top there. Number one, the soleus.
That's your favourite, that's for sure.
Yeah, number one favourite muscle, and it is a surprise for some people to hear that the calves are being used to such an extent during a counter movement jump. But it's probably not surprising, because you're really having to generate a lot of plantar flexion torque to get you up off the ground. So it's a really good test. We're not just looking at the quads through here, and I think it also fits in. Like, this does fit in quite well in terms of a spectrum with your different tests. Like, you've got your isometric tests, and then you've got your isometric mid-thigh pull, which are again just looking at explosive force generation. Then you go on to your jumps here now, which we're at, and your counter movement jumps, which is because of that counter movement, using a bit more of that stretch shortening cycle and a bit more of that plyometric and tendon ability through there. So I find it's a really nice sort of spectrum that we can test people right all the way across. So we're looking at this case, the ability of the calf and the quads to quickly absorb and generate that force.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. So just consider, when you are obviously performing your vertical kind of jump assessments, they're the main guys. Those kind of plantar flexors and those knee extensors are going to be the main ones that are going to be, producing, I guess, that kind of peak force. All right, so I think then we should talk a little bit about how we should perform our vertical jump or our counter movement jump. And I think the main area of contention is around one key thing. It's, to have the arm swing or not to have the arm swing, to be or not to be in that respect. And look, when we go to the research, we see actually that unfortunately there isn't necessarily a great standardization in terms of, whether or not all counter movement jumps should be performed with hands on the hips, or whether they should be performed with the free arm swing movement there. But I guess there's a bit of a difference depending on which one you choose, right, Luke?
Yeah, and my preference, I do hands on hips, so I take the arm out of it, because the arms do, yes, they do allow you to get further if you use them correctly, and that's where it comes down to a little bit more about technique, like using those arms to to propel you up. There's more technique to that, and so I don't really care about so much about the technique. I just want to assess, more that lower limbs ability to quickly generate that power. So that's my justification for doing it. But you could really do it whatever way you want. You could do both if you want, and seeing that, making sure that there is that, seeing that is that 10% difference from side to side there. But just whatever you do, just make sure that you're then repeating that for that client ongoing.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. I think, at the end of the day, most of our users are going to be using the AxIT system because they want to assess the qualities of, a certain kind of group of muscles or certain, parts of the individual's anatomy. And so we want to minimize as many variables as we can whenever we're performing testing, because that then allows for better repeatability. So that doesn't matter if you're doing an isolated strength test in some way, or whether or not you're doing, something as kind of complicated as a jump type test. If we can remove a variable by keeping the hands on the hips, then we should, and we will get kind of better testing results. So certainly our recommendation is, you keep those hands on the hips once again to try and standardize that testing. So I think that's kind of spot on there. In terms of what we're expecting to see though, Luke, I think the results seem to be fairly consistent, I think, in that respect, in terms of what makes a good jump and maybe when people aren't performing as well as they should.
Yeah, so with some of those combine tests that we saw before, they're way off the charts. They're well and truly above some of those records, are almost more than double the excellent score there. So yes, you can breathe a sigh of relief that we don't need to be seeing such high scores there. But yeah, these are a pretty good range that we use there. And then also we've got the peak force as well. So we've got on our testing results, the first thing you'll see is the peak force, and then you scroll across and you'll see that jump height. So yeah, the peak force, what that's calculating there is the planting down into the plate there to propel them up into the air.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And obviously it's going to then factor in, the individual's body weight and whether or not they kind of fit in respect to that according to your AxIT app. Now, just also bear in mind, obviously, if you have a serious outlier in terms of that individual's weight, maybe someone who's incredibly light, or on the opposite end of the scale, someone who's incredibly heavy, maybe that doesn't quite fit these kind of references as well as possible. But, in terms of that performance, I think overall we're often looking for around that kind of 30 centimeter height, which kind of comes then into when we discuss maybe the drop jump in terms of where that kind of fits in, because often we're performing our drop jumps from heights of around that kind of level. Before we get into that though, there is also your variation that you can perform that isn't the double-legged variation of that counter movement jump, that vertical jump. That's that single-legged variation. And I think this kind of has some interesting application, particularly for some individuals, because it really does allow us to look a little bit more at the skill level of that individual, particularly in how they kind of can coordinate and stop, I guess, that kind of buckling in the frontal plane, particularly as they go down into the eccentric phase. Often that's where a lot of individuals will, kind of lose that energy storage. There'll be that kind of, energy loss, as they're kind of loading through the body through there. And if a person doesn't have good skill and good ability to be able to control that, then their results are really going to suffer in that respect. So this is where you can start to maybe look at an individual's kind of ability to coordinate and absorb that load a little bit better, maybe using the single leg variation.
Yeah, and there's justification for going with a single leg as well. I mean, you look at most athletic pursuits, and very rarely are people jumping off on 2 feet. They're usually jumping and landing on the one. So there's sort of justification there for that, whether it's got more carryover into athletic pursuits. The other thing it does allow you to do is obviously looking for left-right differences. Now, you can see that from the counter movement jump. The beauty of the AxIT system with the dual force plate there is you can see that distribution of force on left and right. But allowing to do it this way is you can really break that down a bit more. The challenge, I mean, this is a challenging test. It's challenging to sort of keep the balance here, and King is doing a pretty good job on the demo here, but it is hard to maintain that balance throughout and sufficiently do it quick enough as well, so people aren't wobbling in the bottom position to come out of it. So it is a challenging test, but I think it's one that certainly could be justified to use for those with you want to break down that looking at that left-right difference a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So usually my go-to is if I just want to look at the pure performance, I usually go the double leg variation. If I'm starting to get a bit of a sense that maybe there might be that discrepancy from side to side, or the individual doesn't have great control with the movement for whatever reason, then that's where then I might start to set some baselines with that single leg variation. So that can help in that respect there.
Yep.
So what about then a horizontal jump then, Luke? So, look, I cast my mind back to, the days of maybe some of the school kind of physical assessments, in our kind of PE classes and things like that. And I always remember doing a double leg broad jump. I wasn't exactly the star performer in that respect. But I think what's kind of interesting is the difference between a vertical jump and a broad jump to horizontal jump is that there is that kind of takeoff angle factor that, once again, you've got to have that skill and coordination to execute at the best possible kind of angle to get the best possible results. And I think this is where the AxIT system can really kind of help, maybe because there's so much variability in if it's relying so much on that skill, where the AxIT system maybe allows us to look more at just the forces, the kinetics that are going on rather than the kinematics.
Yeah, that's right. As you said, there's certainly a technique to it, much like throwing a ball. You've got to get that projection angle right to get the furthest distance. So for those that are perhaps not as well trained in that, going off the force plate data and the peak force is probably more useful than looking at the distance. This is obviously the mat AxIT combination we've got going through there, jumping off the plates and looking at that distance off the mat. I mean, the advantage of using the horizontal jump is you're looking at their ability to horizontally produce force. So this is good for using this for your runners or anyone involved in any team sports where it is involving forward momentum. Then this is where this test can be useful for as well. And so looking at the distance, but also that force.
Yeah, I'm often combining a lot of these different kind of hop tests, particularly, I guess, kind of later on in my management with my clients as well. It's just the type of thing you want to be able to cover all your different bases to try and find if there are any, maybe some weaknesses in their performance that could be addressed. So this is where I'd often choose to start to introduce something like a horizontal jump as well. And look, what's kind of interesting, I think, is that we do see this almost a bit of consistency in terms of the amount of force that's being produced across all of these tests. It's always at least kind of that 2 times plus of body weight worth of force, which is really, I think, great as well. If you're doing these assessments, don't forget that this is a really useful opportunity to kind of explain, I guess, the nature of the forces that go through people's bodies when they are performing certain movements and certain tests. Often a lot of people probably wouldn't consider the fact that they need to have over 2 times their own body weight in terms of the strength and the capacity to tolerate that, just to be able to perform some of these simple tasks.
The other thing too is that we're looking at we're obviously getting our measurements here and our objective data, but also looking at the quality of the movement is really important for all these jumps and hops here. I mean, the hop testing was recently coming under a bit of criticism for looking at return to play testing for ACLs, and basically you can have people that pass the 90% difference, but it just looks horrible, and so that's where we're doing this stuff, but we're also watching them at the same time, and that's the great thing. You can just you hit record and on the AxIT system, and then you're actually just watching them perform the movement. So quality is important as quantity with these two.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. All right. So, look, we've talked about then, I guess, what some of the raw numbers might be, but then what we've got next is, how we can start to apply these. So I guess some of those different indexes that, that are available in terms of how we can start to look at some of these assessments. So, one of the first ones is looking at something like a dynamic strength index, which we've mentioned once again in some of our previous presentations. And, we obviously can see that the vertical jump can be a really useful component of, being able to assess, I guess, someone's plyometric ability, particularly when we start to compare it to maybe some of those more max strength tests.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, marrying up those 2 tests of the isometric mid-thigh pull and the counter movement jump can also work really well together, is because they can give us this DSI and allow us to then determine, well, does this athlete need more of this or more of that? And a case example, I recently had a sprinter who we did this testing on, and was found that his counter movement jump was, his isometric mid-thigh pull was very good, and his counter movement jump was okay. And so that then put him with the dynamic strength index. That put him that we actually needed to work more for him on some ballistic stuff. So he was very strong, so we didn't need to put a whole heap of time into the necessarily doing strength training, but started to need to move him more into plyometrics. And funny enough, his coach had the suspicion that was going to be the case, and so we actually then were able to back that up with the data to show that, and we'll use that as a monitoring tool as well to track him over time. So yeah, those 2 tests I really like also, and been doing more of that over the last 12 months of marrying those 2 tests together and giving us that DSI.
Yeah, I think that's just a really great use for it, right? Like just because, you've got someone who's performing probably well overall doesn't mean that they can't be optimized, to do it even better. And that's a great example where, we can start to do that. We can also maybe start to use that, to give context and give reference, using some of the other kind of ratios and indexes like that kind of eccentric utilization ratio. Once again, we've kind of mentioned this one again. This is where then that counter movement jump or that vertical jump, we can start to compare that to something like just that plain squat jump, taking it down into that pause position and then performing the explosive concentric phase. Once again, we can get a bit of a ratio to see where this person's at.
Yeah, and so the squat jump, what we're doing here is we're just getting them in the bottom position. So a normal counter movement jump, you have them standing up, then they bob down and then explode up as quickly as they can. So our squat jump here, we're just getting them to lower down into the bottom position and then just exploding from there. So what we're doing is we're eliminating the ability of the body to, I guess, to store that energy from the preloading point of view. So we're taking that out of the equation. So it's just a pure ability to generate explosive force from that bottom position. A couple of things with this test you want to make sure is you've got to be really strict on them, making sure that they don't do a little bob down the bottom. So you get them starting at the bottom of the squat, but make sure that they're not doing a little dip and then coming up. So they're basically going straight from that point there. I've even heard one person saying, they put like a pole at the bottom position and say there's going to be a pole sitting there, and if you sit down on that, that's going to get you right in the buttock. So making sure that they are not bobbing down, that they're just then going straight from exploding straight up. And what that allows us to do then is we're then comparing the performance on that test to the performance of the counter movement jump. Now we should see the counter movement jump, they should get a greater height on that, and that's where we see that 115 to 130%. And that's because being able to generate and store that energy, then release, that should give you a greater height. So if you're finding that the two are level, well then there's going to be a problem with their ability to store and release that energy, and that's when you can then to put them into training that focuses more on that energy storage and release rather than explosive strength from that the squat jump shows us. So that's where these two tests can work quite well together.
Yep. And obviously vice versa, if their score is scoring, far greater than, say, a 130% or something like that, maybe they're actually kind of too good in terms of their eccentric load. Maybe there's room for improvement in terms of just generating more kind of concentric force. Maybe they would benefit from some more max strength training or something like that in that respect. So a nice little ratio, a really easy one to use, to be able to kind of compare some results. And I think, look, that probably then comes into, I guess, talking about the utilization, particularly of that kind of sudden eccentric loading and kind of whether or not people have appropriate amounts of this. Because this is often, the thing that's most important from a performance standpoint, the ability for someone to kind of really explode in their movement. This is where the drop jump in particular becomes a really specific test that we can use, particularly to focus on that quality.
Yeah, and this is sort of forming a part of drop jump, drop hop, mainly drop hop, but that's forming a big part of my assessment in runners and field athletes. Again, it's sort of following that step progression, going from our counter movement jump to then more complex movements and things that are putting greater demand on that plyometric ability are with the drop jumps and the drop hops. Interestingly, with in terms of with the order of tests, I mean, if we I suppose just a quick discussion on that. I mean, my approach is I'll tend to do the more explosive stuff at the beginning of the testing session. I want to make sure that they're sort of warmed up first. So you may do a few movements there, but then my preference is usually to program these at the start of near the start of the testing session before you start doing all, fatiguing them with all the battery of tests that you've got after it. So I prefer to see these fresh, but you could easily justify, testing them fatigued as well and seeing what they're like with that. But that's sort of my approach to it. What about you, mate? Have you got a particular order you like to do these?
I totally agree in the sense that, if you want to get just those kind of pure numbers in terms of, their performance when fresh, then yes, you want to do it early on in the testing battery. But also, being intentional in the sense that, if you do have a feeling that maybe there is an issue or a limitation under fatigue, then making sure you assess that, in a fatigue state as well. We do see from the research that, a lot of those hop based and jump based performances can be really influenced by levels of fatigue, and that might actually be the most revealing thing, particularly if you're working with someone who, say, returning to sport, returning to play. That's when you're going to want to know how they perform is, maybe later on in the game, or when they are in that fatigue state. So that's where, we've got to be making sure that we're not just only assessing people when they're fresh. I think, for us as health and fitness professionals, we can often be guilty of that. Sometimes, that consideration under fatigue is really important as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we spoke about, I think we touched on maybe with the knee and the knee flexor, and there's some research showing with, hamstring testing under fatigue, it was able to pick up, it was 100% in this particular AFL study of those that had suffered a previous injury, that they showed a big drop in strength post a fatiguing protocol. So I agree. I'll tend to, like, with that whole fatigue, especially for ACLs, definitely. But you could justify doing that for really anything, seeing how they drop after fatigue. So yeah.
And the fatigue protocols are usually pretty simple, look, it could be just that you put them through some of the other testing, as a as part of it, just to save time. But as long as you're getting an individual up to, approximately like 80% of their max heart rate, whether that be through some, type of repeated exercise, maybe it's, something like getting them to go for a bit of a run beforehand, getting them on the bike or something like that, if you've got access to that type of equipment in your facility, then all those things are easy ways to get that kind of pre-level of fatigue. So that's something to consider for the allies before they do their testing. But let's talk about some of the results here, Luke. So, what are some of the things that you're looking for in terms of, the jump height as well as the ground contact time, when you're assessing individuals?
So firstly, we want to see them being able to clear, for irrespective of their whether they're a speed or an endurance athlete, we want to see them being able to clear the height of the step. So, if you measure the height of your step there, mostly around sort of 22, 25, 30 centimeters around that mark. But we want to see that their jump result is higher than that. We also want to see them be, the idea of this test is to be able to store and release this energy very quickly. So we want to see them making contact with the ground and then basically jumping up from there. So we want to see those ground contact times be really, really quick. When we're dealing with running, we're looking at that 0.25 average ground contact time when we run. When sprinting, it's a little bit faster than that. So the ground contact time that we want to see in this test is around those marks. So for the sprinting athletes, we want to see it be 0.2 seconds. And for the endurance runners, we want to see it be around that 0.35. Now, you'll see a lot of people that will get, and having done a lot of this testing before this and the hopping, a lot of people will be around like the 0.35, getting closer to 4. And this is sort of in untrained, people that are just runners or I suppose more your weekend warriors and haven't done a lot of plyometric training before. This is where you'll often see them sit. So, this is where you can steer them towards more of that training if indicated, and in order to improve those athletic traits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty spot on. And look, and we see that kind of reflected in some of the research. So the study by Young, found similar findings. Looking for ground contact times of around that 0.2. Interestingly, though, there is some kind of research that found kind of normative reference results that were that little bit higher, as you said. And I think this is where these are results that could be improved upon. Particularly in this other study here by Struzik, found in some of those kind of younger, kind of still high-level basketballers, there was obviously like a lot of improvement, probably in the coordination of those individuals. So that's where you might find or assess, particularly if you're working with maybe some of those younger athletes, you might find that they're displaying ground contact times that are a little bit higher. And this is where maybe there's some room for improvement in terms of their coordination and their skill levels, which is going to help, I guess, with their performance, particularly as they're developing and as, kind of those younger individuals are, kind of growing as well.
Yeah, yep. And we sort of mentioned before about the sort of conditions that we might be, using this for. The drop hop and the drop jump, I think, are really important for tendinopathy patients. So those that's I'd say actually the drop hop I'm using pretty much on everyone, even just as a general running screening. But from an injury specific point of view, it's definitely your tendinopathy, because the tendon is responsible for that energy storage and release. Soft tissue strains definitely as well. ACLs, it's a big part of with the drop hop. It's a big one, and we'll talk about that. Next. In fact, we might as well flick over onto the next slide here with the. We've got one more to go before that. But,
I think it just comes into them. We talked about some of those indexes and some of those ratios just before, and none is probably more important, I think, than that reactive strength index, right? Which is one that we've included in your AxIT system as, a value that's really easy to get some results on and start to look at. And there's often been a little bit of confusion, I think, around, I guess, kind of how this actually works and what a good result. So a good opportunity, I think, to just define that a little bit more and how that might relate then, I guess, to some of those tendon storages that you were talking about before there, Luke.
Yeah, so the RSI, what that's looking at, how that is calculated, is it's looking at the ground contact time and then multiplying that by the jump height. So and that gives you a figure in the RSI. Now RSI in the literature, so there's been some work looking at that's been able to correlate that with acceleration and change of direction as well too, and especially on our jump hops and our drop jumps and our drop hops, it's really looking at a big one for those calf and Achilles, and also to some extent in through the quads and the patella tendon there as well too. So really important one. I use that. You refer to that looking at that metric quite a bit with the RSI, and so you're not just looking at at the jump. The contact time and the jump height, but also looking at this RSI, metric. Are they actually matching up in that regard?
And it really just kind of summates that, I think, kind of really kind of combines. So often you'll look at that RSI value, kind of determine maybe where the individual sits from that. And then from there, then you can maybe kind of determine by looking at the ground contact time and or the jump height as to, where maybe some of the benefits might arise, or where this individual can maybe make some gains in terms of their training and performance based on some of that. And so I think, look, this is probably then a good opportunity to refer to. I know some of the work, particularly by the SSC guys over in Ireland gets kind of quoted a lot, and we see a lot of people kind of expecting that, the RSI value for a lot of the people that they're working with, why isn't it kind of, or why are they getting such low results? And this is where I think that there might be a bit of misunderstanding as to kind of what a normal result might be and kind of what the results are that gets kind of quoted by some of these more high performance groups there. So if you've seen some of that information and that, that kind of says that, look, an individual should be getting kind of over kind of a 1.5 RSI in terms of that value. Look, it's really starting to look at kind of where's the benefit going to be for some of their training, because that is done in such elite individuals. So, for example, if you have an individual, an athlete who is maybe scoring less than a 1.5 in terms of their RSI, it probably just suggests that they're going to see a lot of benefit, and they're going to see some gains from continuing to work on their strength, developing their strength and their capacity, particularly, I guess, for those plantar flexors and those knee extensors, but also then starting to look at the quality of their technique and their movement. So maybe beginning some low-level plyometric exercises so that they can start to train and enhance their skill levels and coordination there to be able to apply that strength is going to help them in how they perform. Once we start to get over that, into that kind of 1.5, maybe to a 3, that's where the individual's probably got pretty good strength. They're probably going okay in terms of maybe their basic technique, and maybe they just need to kind of continue to enhance and train, I guess, that neuromuscular drive in their ability to kind of apply that technique and generate that velocity and force, particularly on their kind of landing. And then once again, if you're getting an individual who's scoring over 3, this is when we're coming back to, looking at almost that original kind of counter movement jump. These are individuals who are performing at the highest level. If we look at some of those kind of NFL combine results and things like that, these are individuals that you're probably not going to be able to squeeze any more performance out of those people. They're performing already at the highest possible level. And so, we might need to look elsewhere if we're still having issues with this individual's performance at where we can get the gains from.
Yeah, and as you said, look, it's very rare you're going to see someone getting above that RSI above a 3. I don't think I've actually tested anyone that's got to that. It is very high level, but as you said, you're just aiming for around that 1.5 to that mark there. And I mentioned before, I think I said multiplied, but it is divided by. So, and there are a couple of ways like you can do with RSI. So you can do it with using ground contact time, or you can also use it during flight time as well too. So the AxIT system uses the ground contact time, and that's you do not need to worry about calculating that. That stuff is given to you straight away, so it's just displayed there on your tablet. So you don't need to be crunching the calculator there. But yeah, I think then anywhere of that 1.5 is certainly achievable. And as you can see in that, in the Stuzik again, like those 17-year-olds, I don't know, question how good they are. That they're not quite there, but then again they are 17. So. But in saying that, I've certainly seen some young, some talented young kids get good within good RSI scores on these tests. So yeah.
I think that's spot on. And look, and once again, that 1.5 value kind of makes a fair bit of sense. If we're doing a drop jump from a 30 centimeter height, and the individual is jumping to approximately kind of 30 centimeters, again, and they're applying it with, say, a ground contact time of a 0.2, which is what we're looking for in those individuals, then that would be your 1.5. That's kind of like that base level through there. So we can see, just from that example, that to score somewhere up in the 3s, we need an individual kind of performing an over 60 centimeter jump height, as long as their ground contact time is kind of in the adequate zone through there. So a really, really high performance there, based on some of the things that we've seen so far. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And just so that our allies kind of have that kind of context with the people that they're working with, I think that'll help maybe kind of clear up, where this RSI value really fits in.
Yep.
So tell us then a little bit more about how you use then the single leg variation then, Luke, because once again it's a really useful one then, I think, to maybe start to compare side to side.
Yeah, and so this is one, as I mentioned earlier, the one that I will use a lot of, increasingly more now. I don't tend to do as much as the double leg drop jump as I do definitely more with the single leg. So I like the ones I commonly will go to will be the counter movement jump and then the single leg drop hops. They're the two ones I pretty much will be testing on most people, and then up to your discretion as to what you want to do then further from those. But love the single leg one because it really does allow you to see that ability to load into one side. We mentioned before that it's very rare in an athletic pursuit that you're jumping off from both legs. So this really tests that ability to jump and land. Use a lot for running, which obviously is a one-legged sport. Thing with this is that you do have to make sure that you're cueing this right. Again, with the hands on hips, it's up to and the same with the drop jumps as well. Up to you whether you want to let the arms free or want to have them on the hips. I just standardize it. I get them having on the hips there. It does make it a little bit harder for them to balance as well too when they're landing from that hop. So you've got to take that into consideration. But that's just what I use. You've also got to make sure that when they're stepping down, so they're on the step, you've got to make sure that what they're going to do is they're going to lead with the step that the foot that they're going to land on. So if they wanted to test the left side, they're standing on the step, they're stepping off from the left side, and then they're lowering down, but they leave the step as the foot gets to that point there. So what you've got to make sure that they're not doing is they're on the step, the left foot comes off, and then they're just, lowering down, and then they jump off from there. So the actual, jump height is really only this versus that. So just got to make sure you get the technique right. And for this one, I usually get them doing three practices just to get it right and cue them on what you want them doing, and then just make sure that they conduct that test correctly there. Again, looking for quality here, so looking for how they're landing and then how their ability to generate that force. I'll accept a bit of wobbling, like sometimes when they jump and then they drop down, they jump and then they land, and sometimes they might sort of wobble a little bit there. Just take that into consideration. You can make a note of that, of what their landing quality was like from side to side. But it is a more challenging test. It does require them to a bit of balance with this one. So you may find your lower level athletes and your everyday people may sort of struggle with the coordination of this one, but a really useful test. And also has been shown, I know that SSC over in Dublin, we sort of quote those guys a few times because they're doing a lot of groundbreaking work in looking at the use of force plates and objective data in terms of injury and performance. But those guys use this a lot. It's a really big, important test for them for ACL, and it's one of those ones that they're pretty much their go-to test in terms of predicting successful outcomes is their single leg drop hop test. So and that's compared to all the other ones. So your isokinetic, quad strength and your hop tests, all this sort of stuff. This one is the one that they're big go-to. So and they've got a huge amount of data to back that up. So really important test, the single leg drop hop.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites as well. And one that I also like to combine maybe with a little bit of slow motion video analysis from time to time as well. You can just kind of set up, another smart device and run some of the slow motion video analysis apps as well, just to look at and start to compare, I guess, some of the coordination and the technique in the landing and the propulsion as well. So you can really get a lot of useful information that I think, once again, correlates and has a lot of transferable effect for a lot of the sporting activities that people want to be able to perform. So some really great reference data points there that we can use as well. Certainly a test that all the AxIT allies should be using, particularly with their sporting individuals.
And I'll sort of make comments there too. The RSI values on this test are not that hard to achieve. You generally see where they'll fall off at the ground contact times, and so these are the ones that that they might be passing the RSI, but they're missing a bit on those ground contact times. They're spending too long on the ground there. So that's something I will work on for these people, is that indicates that they may need to do some more plyometric training. I mean the test can be the exercise too with a lot of all these tests here. But you'll often see that the ground contact time is the thing that might be lacking. So
Yep. Well, that then maybe brings us to another kind of test where you can look at that ground contact time, which is this single leg rebound test, which is one that, Luke, you've kind of brought to our attention before. And I think, once again, another nice variation where we can start to, combine not only just the vertical plane, but also the horizontal plane as well, and start to assess that.
Yeah, and this is another one that I've got from the SSC group, and Colin Griffith over there has done some research into this test, which is yet to be published. But the reason they developed this test was, again, looking more for that horizontal force production. So I mentioned earlier about the broad jump being good for that. This is a single leg version of it, but also what you've got here is you've got that initial jump, then you've got that energy storage and release there. So you, rather than going from a dead start like the broad jump is, this is involving that two contact, which guess what, when you're running in athletic pursuits there, that's exactly what you're doing. You're going from from 1 foot and that's that foot strike there. So what we're looking at through here is we're getting them to do just a little jump onto the plates, and they can sort of determine that distance there, but having a hurdle just to encourage a little bit of that vertical height initially, rather than coming in too straight and then jumping in there. And so what we're looking at through here is we're just looking at ground contact time with this one. So looking at ground contact time, how long they're spending on that plate, and then also taking a measurement of the off the mat there too. So looking at hop distance, and where I'll use this is a great one for runners. Also a really good one for calf and Achilles issues. So if you've got someone with a calf strain, ongoing Achilles issues here, or just using it as a general running screening, then this is a really good test for that.
Yeah, no, fantastic variation. One, look, if the allies want to be able to just kind of set that up in their own AxIT software, a simple one that you create a custom test using your drop hop test for that, and the algorithm will work perfectly there in terms of being able to kind of calculate some of those kind of values there for that test. So a really great variation that I still need to test out a little bit more myself, but I think it looks really good.
I think from memory the test that I duplicated was it might have been the running one, looking at the impact forces there, because I don't know whether drop hop will do that, because there's no second contact, so it's just like bang and then off. So I think the running one, but it's been ages since I've actually created that test, but I think have a play around with it anyway. So it is a useful test, so for everyone to test out.
So I guess then that kind of comes to that point you were talking about, the test being in the exercise, and the exercise can be the test in many ways. And this is where we can maybe start to develop, I guess, particularly, I guess, some of that plyometric skill. Often as long as we've kind of tested our clients, we've made sure that they have adequate strength, particularly in terms of their isometric strength, and then maybe looking at maybe some of those more concentric phases, they all look fine. Then if there's still maybe a deficiency in terms of someone's performance, often what we're looking at is we're trying to improve, I guess, their coordination and their skill, their ability to kind of load, particularly looking at those kind of ground contact times. And then as well, that kind of neuromuscular drive, how quickly can you produce that force and that power? And this is where I guess some of those different plyometric training variations would start to fit in to be able to try and condition that.
Yeah, and that's where we've obviously gone through our battery of testing. This is the beauty of the AxIT systems. It really allows you to see, look, does this person need more strength? Do they need more more plyometrics? We've got our a dynamic strength index, which we've looked at before, and obviously all the things that now we've that this testing has revealed can really help to classify this athlete and this client as to what they need more of. And we mentioned before, that the test can be the exercise, but there's a really wide variety of tests exercises that can be used in the plyometric spectrum. And in my experience, seeing a lot of runners, they, despite running being a plyometric sport, they often do, if they are passing the strength components, that the required strength in the different regions, they're often a bit of a ways off the plyometrics, and it is often a really neglected area and neglected part of strength training is plyometric training. And that's where I think the beauty of having these results is you can say, look, yeah, your strength is pretty good, but as you can see here, we really need to work on this plyometrics. So this is what we're then going to start to implement into your program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, and usually it's a fairly simplistic process. Start from easiest to most difficult. So you might begin with things like some of those kind of on the spot skips or kind of pogo kind of jumps, those type of things. Things where you're not moving in any of the sagittal or the frontal plane or anything like that. You're just really just kind of moving up and down. Maybe focusing on a double leg variation first for more stability, then working toward more single leg variation, kind of focusing on, once again, kind of enhancing that skill level in the single leg or the unilateral kind of mode, and then from there, just starting to add I guess more load in different ways. So that could be something like performing, say, a box jump, jumping onto a certain height, or jumping down from that, or then potentially some of those kind of repeat bounding efforts, those type of things as well, where the load and the I guess the degree of difficulty goes up because it becomes more challenging.
That's it.
There you go. So there's just a couple of little tips for the AxIT allies if they are looking to kind of develop those plyometrics. I'd love to see, kind of how you guys kind of do it, or if you've got, some other kind of favorite plyometric exercises that you love to use. I'd love to see those in the AxIT allies community as well. But look, I don't think we could sum it up any better then, Luke, after today's chat, then in the words of Van Halen, you know, all the AxIT allies, they just got to go ahead and jump, mate. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's where we need the audio in there, because nothing replicates that. With a bit of Van Halen, go ahead and jump.
That's exactly right.
That's it. Get out there, start doing these tests if you're not already doing them. Try them on yourself, and